Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Hello dear students, welcome to another lecture. In this class, we are going to begin with the third chapter of Class 8 Alternative English Nagaland Board, which is Glimpses of the Past. Now this chapter that we shall be reading is basically a graphical representation of the revolt, the independence revolt that took place in our country between the year 1757 to 1857. So this pictorial representation by S.T. Sawant clearly depicts all the instances, all the things that happened even before India got its independence in 1947. So we are going to read this in 9 parts, where we shall read about how individually, step ahead of other, the Indians proceeded towards expressing their annoyance and their dissatisfaction with the British government. So let us start reading. Now the first part that we shall read about is the martyrs. Now the martyrs, who are the martyrs? Martyrs is a term that is used for those people who have sacrificed their lives for the nation. Those people who who had foregone their lives for the sake of their country. Now in this picture, as you can see, there is a function in Delhi. We can see Lata Mangeshkar, a very famous Indian singer, and she is singing a song. And in her song, she talks about, or she says, "Oh my countrymen, let your eyes fill with tears as you recall the sacrifices of Indian martyrs." Now, this is the English translation of a very famous Hindi song, which is "Mere Watan ke logo, zara aankh mein bhar lo paani." So this is the English translation of the same, and in the audience we can see Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi. They are one of those people sitting and attending, and in the picture below we can see that Jawaharlal Nehru, on listening to this song, is actually remembering about all the martyrs who actually sacrificed their lives for the sake of the country. We have Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Bhagat Singh, Lala Lajpat Rai, then we have Gandhi ji. So, and all these people whose pictures, whose portraits we can see in the first part. So basically, these were the martyrs, a few, not even all, just a few of the martyrs who had sacrificed their lives for the sake of their nation. Now moving ahead. The second part of the chapter is the company's conquest. Which company is being talked about over here? It is the East India Company. We all know the role played by the East India Company in the rule that Britishers had practiced over India. So the conquest, the rule, conquest means the rule of the East India Company between the years 1757 and 1849. So in the first picture, let me just zoom it a bit, yes. So in the first picture, you can see that the East India Company, with its superior weapons, the British East India Company was extending its power in 18th century India. Superior weapons, the better weapons, the better armaments that this British East India Company had, they were extending their power on India in the 18th century. Now here you can see is the map in the year 1765. The yellow portion shows those areas which were ruled by the Indian provinces, while the pink area shows those areas which were by the Britishers. So in the 18th century, the Britishers occupied only a very small part of the entire India. but they were extending, they were growing. Now, the second picture says that the Indian princes were very short-sighted. They only thought about what was near at hand. They never thought about the long-term impact or the future impact of anything. That upstart Raja, Bah, call the English merchants, they will help me to defeat him, was the scenario that was prevailing in the 18th century. The Indian princes thought that in order to occupy the other Indian regions, in order to defeat the other Indian kings and princes, they always took the help of the English merchants, the Britishers. They believed that the Britishers would help them to gain dominance, to rule over the other Indian nations, over the other Indian regions. But they did not know that this in the long run was certainly going to prove very harmful to them. The people had no peace due to such constant fights. So the people were fighting so constantly with each other that there was no peace prevailing all around. Now, the next picture says that these rivalries, these internal fights that were going on between the Indians only, one Indian king fighting with the other Indian king. So these internal rivalries helped the East India Company, and it could easily subdue the Indian princes one by one. So the Indian princes one by one were dominated, were captured by the East India Company. A far-seeing ruler like the brave Tipu of Mysore fought the British till he died fighting. So there was one Indian ruler who's been called as far-seeing. He was one of those Indian rulers who had the capability to foresee that what is happening now, that is taking the help of Britishers, is not going to help in the long run. So this ruler was the Tipu of Mysore. He fought with the Britishers till the end and he died fighting. So he also was one of those martyrs who sacrificed their lives for the sake of his nation. Now in this picture, how did the Indians react to the conquest? These conquests, the rule of the British East India Company, with the extending rule, the Indians had divided opinions over it. Now first, there were few people. This division shows the two sides of the people with two different opinions on this perception. So there were a handful of people who said, thank God, there is peace in our country now. No more wars and no looting by tanks. So now that the East India Company had started interfering, there were a few Indians who were happy and who believed that now there was no peace in their country. There were no wars, there were no looting, there were no people who would rob you of your wealth. It is God who sent the British. So the people actually thought that the Britishers were messengers of God as they were helping them. Our destiny is linked with them, and they also believe that their destiny, their fate is interconnected with the Britishers. On the other hand, there were a few people in India who believed that the British has killed or dethroned our kings. They had started to see that the Britishers had started killing the Indian kings and princes and taken away their thrones. Dethroned means they had taken away their thrones. Some kings were not good, but after all, they were of this land. The people believed that some of the Indian kings were not that good, but the fact that they were Indians mattered the most. Now we have become slaves of the foreigners, and they were afraid of the fact that now they have become the slaves of the foreigners. Now the next part shows the British rule in the duration 1765 to 1836. Now, the religious leaders in India preached ideas like untouchability and child marriage. We all know that India has had a very popular, picture, a very popular reputation of being superstitious. And this is one of the primary reasons for that the religious leaders, those people who were considered as leaders by the normal people, they always preached negative things. So religious leaders in those days, they preached untouchability. That, if we touch somebody who does not belong to our caste, we are going to become polluted. They preached child marriage. They agreed to the fact that it was okay to get a child married at an early age. They said that anyone who crosses the seas loses his religion. So the religious gurus, the religious leaders believe that anyone who crosses the sea loses his religion. There were others who believed that all the misery that was there in the world, all the problems that prevailed in the world were only and only because of the women. So such were the views of the religious gurus. The truth was that Indians had lost self-respect and the British scorned them. Now, because of all these things, what happened? The Indians started losing their self-respect in the eyes of the Britishers, and Britishers started scorning them. They started hating them. They started disliking them for the kind of attitude that they carried. You see the conversation between two people. Here is a Britisher and here is an Indian. So the Britisher said, the natives are unworthy of trust, incapable of honesty. So one Britisher was talking to the other Britisher, saying that the natives, that is the Indian people, they did not deserve any trust and cannot be assumed to be honest as well. And then we can see one Indian with folded hands saying, true, your honor, but I am honest. So, the Indians had actually lost their self-respect because a few of them had become the slaves to the British already. Now, being merchants, the British wanted quick profits. Their heavy taxes forced the farmers to abandon their fields. Now, the Britishers were merchants, they were businessmen, and they wanted to make quick profits. So, what did they do? They started imposing heavy taxes on the farmers so that they would abandon their fields. Abandon so that they would leave their fields. They would stop working on their fields altogether. So you can see what was the state of the Indian farmers at that time. The Indian farmer was told by the Britisher. So the Britisher said to the Indian, you are still in arrears. If you don't pay next week, I will send you to jail. So the British merchant was threatening an Indian farmer, telling him that you are still in arrears. That means there is a lot of due amount that you have to pay. And if you don't pay that by next week, I will send you to jail. The Indian to this replied that your men are taking all my crop. How am I going to pay you anything if your men will take away my crop? If I don't have anything to earn money with, how will I be able to pay you? So such was the condition that was created by the Britishers in those days. Okay. Still, the British invented other methods which gave them more profits. So just looting the farmers was not enough. The Britishers were constantly working on more methods that would help them earn more profits. The goods manufactured in England should not have any import duty when brought into India. A good idea, sir. And this ways, the East India Company's laws began to cripple the Indian industries. So what was another thing that the Britishers did? They started making things, manufacturing things in England and bringing them to India without paying any import duty to the Indian administration. This ways, obviously, the money was not coming into the Indians' hands, and slowly and gradually, since the goods that were being sold in India now were all made in Britain, so the Indian industries started losing their charm. They started losing their employment. They had no work to do now. Inevitably, famines followed. Between 1822 and 1836, 15 lakh Indians died of starvation. Now, inevitably, it was unavoidable, but there were famines. Famine, shortage of everything. And between 1822 and 1836, 15 lakh Indians died of starvation, of hunger. You can hear one of the Indian, saying the British policies are ruined. Policies ruined the expert artisans and their business. The expert artisans. Now, who are the artisans? The artists. We all have read in history that the kings, the rulers, the princes, they always wanted a lot of artistic work to be displayed in their kingdoms. And all these things were made by the Indian artists by hand. They would work hard and would make such paintings. We have Madhubani paintings and all such beautiful examples evident. But now that the Britishers had started ruling, what was coming forth? That all the things were made in the industries, that too in Britain, and the Indian artisans also had started losing their charm and they had nothing they could do. Now, in the next part of the chapter, we read about Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Now, Raja Ram Mohan Roy was a learned man. He was a very wise and intelligent man from Bengal, and he understood what was the problem with the country. So he said, let us not despise ourselves. Our ancient culture is great and we are capable of greater achievements. Must reform our society. Superstitions have been ruining us. So it was Raja Ram Mohan Roy who understood the value of superstition and the problem connected with its spreading its root in the country. So he said that he believed that our culture is very rich, it is very vast. We need to preserve our culture, but at the same time, we need to get rid of superstition as well. Because it is because of the superstition only that our society is getting ruined, it is getting destroyed. He told his wife Uma, cows are of different colors, but the color of their milk is the same. Different teachers have different opinions, but the essence of every religion is the same. So he once told his wife that we have different colored cows all around us, but the milk that these cows give is all the same. Similarly, the teachers may be different, but the essence, the importance, the value of the education, the value of the learnings that these teachers give is always the same. So he was attracted by the science and modern knowledge. So unlike the other Indians, Raja Ram Mohan Roy was always attracted by the modern knowledge and science. And he believed that knowledge should be practical and scientific. Rather than believing in superstition, he wanted knowledge to be practical and scientific. He crossed the seas. Now, if you remember, we've just read that according to some religious gurus, if you cross the sea, you lose your religion. But he crossed the seas. He went to England to see what made the British so powerful. And he talked to the British also there. He told them that we accept you as rulers and you must accept us as your subjects. But you must remember the responsibility a ruler owes to his subjects. So he said to the Britishers when he went to England that fine, we have accepted you to be our rulers, but a ruler is nothing without a subject. Unless and until you have people you can rule upon, you will not be able to do anything at all. So we accept you as rulers, but similarly, you will have to remember that if you want to rule on us, you have a lot of responsibilities towards your subjects as well. Now, Raja Ram Mohan Roy even started a newspaper, but the Britishers, they stopped the newspaper in 1823 because they were afraid that Raja Ram Mohan Roy's newspaper might impact the minds of Indians in India that they were ruling so comfortably over. Okay. Now, the fifth part of the chapter is oppression, rule, power. So, the British continued to oppress the Indians. In 1818, they passed Regulation 3. Under it, an Indian could be jailed without trial in a court. So, the Britishers continued to oppress, continued to rule over the Indians. In the year 1818, they passed Regulation 3. According to which an Indian could be sent to jail straight away without even having a proceeding in the court. All the time, the British officers that were in India, they drew big salaries and also made fortunes in private businesses. So all the Britishers who were living in India in that duration, they always got big salaries for themselves. They were making fortunes. They were making huge profits for themselves in the private businesses as well. Now, in 1829, the Britain was exporting British goods worth 7 crore rupees to India. So you see, there was no scope for the Indian industries altogether because goods worth rupees 7 crore was made in Britain and was brought into India. The British prospered on the company's loot while the Indian industries began to die. As I told you, the British company, the East India Company, was making profits one after the other, but the Indian industries were dying. Governor General Bentinck reported back home. So he reported back to Britain that the bones of the cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India. The cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India means, if you can see in the picture, this picture clearly depicts the state of the Indian industries, the Indian cotton weavers, the Indian artisans. They had nothing to do. They were left with only being hungry. They were left with suffering. They were left with pain and anger. That is how. Okay, the next part shows the dissatisfaction. So the advent, the beginning of the dissatisfaction among the Indians towards the Britishers. Now, education in India was in Persian and Sanskrit. In 1835, Englishman named Macaulay suggested a change. So, all through the while in India, the education was provided to the people in either Persian language or Sanskrit language. So it was an Englishman, Macaulay, who suggested a change. And what was the change that he suggested? That we should teach the natives through the English language. He wanted the Indians to be taught through the English language, and the other Britishers also agreed. Now, this opinion that the Indians would be taught in English language, how did this impact the other Indians? So they believed that English education produced clerks to whom the British gave petty jobs under them. Incidentally, it also produced a new generation of intellectuals. So the Indians believe that if if they would have got English education, they would have ended up becoming clerks under the Britishers. And though the salaries that they would be getting from Britishers would be very petty, very small, minimal amount would be given to them, but at least they will have a job. Also, once you start getting knowledge in the English language, you will become intellectual, wise, and knowledgeable. They believed that we must educate our brothers and try to improve their material conditions. If they will earn more money, automatically their standard of living will get better. For that, we must convey our grievances to the British Parliament. Grievances, complaints. But somebody believed that if we want our Indians to be given some sort of equal opportunities, then we need to put forth our complaint in front of the British Parliament. Let us move ahead. Now, if you see this picture, the first picture of the map that we had seen, in that there was only a very small pink portion, that is the portion ruled by the Britishers, and the rest Indian map showed yellow, that is under the Indian rule. But now you can see the maximum portion in India had been conquered. By 1856, the Britishers had conquered almost the entire India. They cared little about the needs of the Indians. The Britishers did not care much about the needs of the Indians. They believed that our kings have become puppets and we've lost our old jobs. So they thought that their kings have become puppets and they have lost their jobs. They've lost their lands. Now they are converting our brothers. Converting means by giving them information, by giving them education in the English language. A few religious gurus believe that they were converting their brothers also to Englishmen. You only talk, do something to drive them out. Now the rage, anger in the Indians is evident. They wanted to do something so that the Britishers could be thrown out of their country. Now comes the sparks. Sparks, as the name in itself is very explanatory. When the anger started to rise even more. So the taxes continued to ruin the peasants. In Bengal, the Santals who had lost their lands under the new land rules became desperate. In 1855, they rose in rebellion and massacred Europeans and their supporters alike. So, heavy taxes were imposed on the peasants, on the farmers, and they continued to ruin them. They continued to destroy them. In Bengal, the Santhal tribe, they also had lost their land because of the land rule. And now they'd become so angry that they decided to rebel. They decided to fight against the Britishers and they massacred, they destroyed the entire Europe and all the Europeans. So that was the first time when somebody stood and fought against the Britishers. Discontent was brewing in the East India Company's army too. Discontent, dissatisfaction, not only outside the East India Company, but within the East India Company also, as we have seen earlier, that the workers of the East India Company comprised of both Britishers as well as Indians. So there was discontent which was coming up, which was arising between the East India Company's army as well. The white soldier gets huge pay, mansions to live in, servants. So one of the Indian was seen complaining that the white soldier is getting a huge pay, has got mansions, huge houses to live in, he's got servants. While we get a pittance, we get a very small amount and slow promotions. The Angrez asks us to cross the sea, which is against our religion. Who is the Topiwala to abolish our old age customs? And then, the people also started feeling bad about the fact that in order to fight, since they were a part of the army, they were supposed to cross the sea. And for them, crossing the sea means going against your religion. So they thought, who was this Topiwala? Topiwala is just, a reference to the Britishers. That who are they to abolish, to bring an end to our customs which we have been following for such a long time. We must drive out the Angrez. And then they thought that they had to drive out the Angrez. Sepoy Mangal Pandey attacked the adjutant of his regiment and was executed. So Sepoy Mangal Pandey, who was a part of the British East India Company, he attacked the adjutant, that means the British counterpart of his own regiment. He got hold and was killed. Thousands of other sepoys also revolted. They also fought and they were stripped of their uniforms. Their positions were taken away from them. They were humiliated and put in the irons. They were insulted and they were put in the irons, means they were put in the jail. Few Englishmen had cared to understand Indian customs or the people's mind. So there were only a few Englishmen who understood the emotion, the feelings that were behind the Indian customs and the people's mind. Oh, proud Brahmin soldiers, do you know that the grease on the bullet you have to bite is made from the fat of cows and pigs? So one of the Indian was seen telling the Brahmin soldier that the bullet you bite is actually made of cow and pig fat. What? The white man has deceived us too. Deceived, cheated, and gradually they all realized that they were cheated, that the Britishers were insulting their customs and their traditions. Soon, chapatis were sent from village to village to tell the people that their emperor would want their services. So soon, what did they start to do? They started sending chapati from one village to the other, and these chapatis were an indication that the other people to whom the chapatis were given were offering a yes to help if the need be in fighting against the Britishers. Yes, all my village men will be ready. And obviously we can see the man receiving the chapati agreed that whenever you need, my men are going to be ready. Similarly, lotus flower circulated among the Indian soldiers. So the Indian soldiers started circulating the lotus flower. Lotus is the national flower of India. Among the Indian soldiers only, so that they could tell them that now is the time we need to leave the Britishers and stand for our country. Death to the foreigner. And they vowed that they are going to kill the foreigners. The masses gave all help and shelter to the patriots. And when this rivalry, this rebel had begun, the masses, that is the population of the people of the country, they started offering help and house to these patriots, these people who were fighting for the country. Next, we have the revolt of 1857. So there was a violent outbreak in Meerut, a violent fight, a violent battle that took place in Meerut. The sepoys marched to Delhi. The sepoys, they came to Delhi and they came to the court of Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, seeking his support for the same. Now the rebellion, it continued to spread further. There were many landlords who had lost their lands because of the British policies, and now they were so angry. So there were so many landlords who had lost their lands because of the British policies and were very angry, and now even they had decided to fight with the Britishers. They said that the white man's rule has to come to an end. Yes, we will help you. And everybody was ready to help each other. Then came the final chapter, that is the fight for freedom in 1857. There were many the earlier rulers like Begum Hazrat Mahal of Lucknow, who was bitter, who was angry with the Britishers and therefore wanted them to be sent away from their land. The white man has taken away my kingdom. She was upset about that. Then there were other popular leaders like Maulvi Ahmadullah of Faizabad told the people, rise, brothers, rise, the Angrez is ruining our land. So all across the land now, the anger, the despise for the British was increasing. Everybody, all the rulers joined the battle against the foreigners, and the people everywhere in Bareilly, Kanpur, Allahabad, everybody joined hands together to get rid of the Britishers. Azimullah Khan told Tatya Tope, we should have Peshwa Nana Sahib as our leader in this war of independence. And Azimullah Khan wanted Peshwa Nana Sahib to lead this war of independence. There was 80-year-old Kuwar Singh of Bihar. He received a bullet in his wrist. He was shot in his wrist. Mother Ganga, this is my last offering to you. But what did he do? He wanted to continue to fight. He did not want that wrist, the bullet in the wrist, to spread its infection in his body. So using his sword, he cut his wrist and he offered his wrist to Mother Ganga. Such was the patriotism that could be seen in the people in those days, and that was our freedom movement even before the freedom surge of the 1947.